Doogie, who's going to win this by-election?
The SNP are going to win this by-election because it's basically going to be a proxy referendum on the current UK government. I think that's what's going to dominate this. Labour have had a revival, obviously, in Scotland, but that revival, I mean, to say it's stalled, I think is me being kind to Anis Sarwar and Sir Keir Starmer. And I think that's what's going to dominate this. Winter fuel, WASPy, stuff like that. That's going to be the main talking points, rightly or wrongly. Holyrood issues, public services up here, I think are going to go into the background. Obviously, it's an election no one wanted. The reasons it's come about are incredibly sad. But it's a chance. It seems to me a bit of an open goal for John Swinney to sort of solidify the SNP support. I wouldn't say he's revived it, but I think what he's done is kind of arrested the slide. They've got a kind of base, 30-32%. And I think Labour are suffering badly from both the left and the right. They're losing support on the left to the likes of the SNP, and they're also losing support on the right to the likes of Reform, which I'm sure we'll come on to discuss. And so I think it really couldn't have come at a worse time for Labour. I think it's telling. When I done this show 2 weeks ago, Paul seemed quite confident that Monica Lennon was going to stand for Labour. We now know she's not. I think that's a wise move. I think the last thing Labour needs is to lose, one of its more talented politicians. So I think that says a lot about how Labour views this seat now. I think if they thought they were in with a real chance of winning, I think Monica might have stood. And I think it's going to be a decent win for the SNP. And yet, and we've seen it in by-elections and council by-elections, they still struggle. The SNP still struggle. So it's maybe not as clear-cut as I'm making out, but I think the SNP will win.
And Dan, who do you think is going to do it?
Well, I also think probably the SNP, but I do think it's going to be closer than you were maybe suggesting at the start, like to say after, that maybe it might be a bit closer. The reason I think it might be closer than maybe the polls currently suggest is, a year ago, we would not have been sitting here saying the SNP would win this election, not by a long shot. Obviously, so much has changed since then. But I think this is an area that if Labour want to have any chance at all of making inroads in the election in 2026, it's the kind of area they need to start picking up seats. They've obviously pretty much had a clean sweep in the general election, and we know since then all of their troubles in the polls. But I personally think that this is going to be a really interesting by-election, a really important by-election coming so close to the Holyrood election next year. You're right that it's an opportunity for John Swinney, but it's also an opportunity for Anis Sarwar. This could be the moment when his sort of prospects are rejuvenated. Obviously, if it goes the other way, the narrative would be very, very different. But I think, although the national polling is poor for Labour just now, when it gets into local issues, as by-elections always do, when it gets into Labour traditionally being quite strong in this neck of the woods, I think things might really tighten up. I think it'll go down to the wire, and whoever wins, it could transform the narrative going into 2026.
I think whoever does win will be handed a massive boost ahead of the election next year. It'll really set the tone, I think, for the election campaign, because this is a seat that's in Greater Glasgow, it's in the commuter belt, it's the heart of the urban central belt where the majority of Scottish voters are. And if the SNP are to remain as the largest party in Holyrood, number one, and number two, if they're going to have any chance of retaining their fabled pro-independence majority, this is the kind of constituency that they have to be winning. However, on how close the race will be, I did speak to Professor John Curtis. Obviously, there's no introduction on this podcast, the expert of all experts on polling. And he did say that based on current polling, so that's what we've seen in terms of voting intentions in recent months and how the election in 2021 went, how the Westminster election went last year locally. He says if you crunch those numbers, you effectively get a dead heat between Labour and the SNP. I mean, the SNP back in 2021, remember, were polling at about 48% of the constituency. You know, they're not gonna hit that level again. They're about 34, 35 now. Labour, on the other hand, Monica Lennon, you know, even with the state that Labour were in 2021, she managed to return about 33%. So, I mean, that's if, obviously, it's a very big if Labour can hold the ground of where they were, and that's a big if, you know, their vote could drop. We'll come on to reform in a second, but just to kind of talk a bit more about Labour, Keir Starmer, I said to John Curtis yesterday, I said, do you think that, given his relative unpopularity in Scotland, it would be a benefit to Scottish Labour if he stayed away? And Professor Curtis said to me, well, he's actually unpopular everywhere, not just in Scotland. So, but I mean, my own view is that, you know, he's the Prime Minister, you know, he's a leader of the Labour Party. He can't keep away, because if he didn't come up, then the SNP would just repeatedly say, where is the Prime Minister? Is he hiding? So I think we are going to have to see Keir Starmer come up at some point. But